Hello, I'm Alan Gerstel.
And I'm Laurel Sauer. Thanks for joining us for Heritage, a series of exciting local programming originally produced by our partners at the Education Network.
Tonight we bring you a look back at the centennial of the Palm Beach County School District and Palm Beach County itself.
You see, you can't separate one from the other because they both came into existence in 1909. So they both celebrated their centennials in 2009.
Now, many of us have relocated to South Florida from other parts of the country, so many of us don't really know the history of the area.
It is an area that is rich in folklore and rich in colorful characters. But it's also an area that was essentially a wilderness a little more than 100 years ago.
The first settlers here didn't have a schoolhouse. They had no stores or even a post office. Those settlers truly had to rough it. They endured the hardships of the heat, humidity, and the tropical insect population, and they did it all without air conditioning. We can only imagine the kind of life they had to endure. But as we now know, the area has thrived over the years, and so has its school system.
Now, the first local school opened in 1886 near the shores of Lake Worth. Back then, the body of water from Boca Raton to Juno Beach that we now call the Intracoastal Waterway was known as Lake Worth. You can still visit that schoolhouse today, as you will see in our program, but it has been moved from its original location.
We'd like to thank all the South Florida natives who shared their experiences with us and now with you. They've witnessed the changes in the school system firsthand and have graciously agreed to participate in this program. Well, actually, two programs. There's so much to tell you about the Palm Beach County school system that we've had to split it into two parts.
So, let's get started. Tonight, we bring you part one of Palm Beach County Schools, celebrating 100 years of educational excellence.
Dade County was created in 1836 and covered the land from the Florida Keys all the way north to the St. Lucie Inlet. Shortly thereafter, Miami became the county seat. But the area we now call South Florida was wilderness and not very hospitable.
I just can't comprehend living here with no doctors, no hospitals, no newspapers, no inland roads, no railroads. The nearest store was a place called Sand Point, which is today called Titusville. It's 120 miles north. It was over a week journey up the Indian River or on the open ocean and another week back. There was no currency, no banks, very difficult existence.
There were no permanent structures except the shacks built of lumber and thatch by the pioneer families. And those families braved wild animals and mosquitoes as they labored to eke out a meager existence. To them, a formal education was a luxury. But as the decades passed, the pioneers recognized the need.
And there was no school in Dade County, anywhere in Dade County, until 1886, when the residents at the northern end of Dade County lobbied the school district at the time, which wasn't much of a district, it was a volunteer superintendent, and to appease the pioneer settlers at this end of the county, they told them they would hire a school teacher if they would find the land and build a school.
The school district, based in Miami, which had only been formed in 1885, allocated $200 for construction. Several local families donated land about a mile north of the current Flagler Bridge on Palm Beach. Local pioneers agreed to build it. 7 children showed up on the first day of school in the one-room schoolhouse. The teacher was a 16-year-old named Miss Hattie Gale, who was younger than some of her students. Her father, Reverend Elbridge Gale, was the first superintendent of Dade County schools.
She taught a multitude of ages from 6 to sometimes even 18. Of course, the older children didn't come all the time. They had to go to work. Coming to school then was a privilege. It wasn't a law. So a lot of days they weren't here all day. Some days they left at noon.
Miss Gale stressed reading, writing, and arithmetic, of course, But she also emphasized manners, elocution, and discipline, as these modern-day students are learning on a school field trip to the Little Red Schoolhouse Museum.
Everyone lived around the Lake Worth community, the lake area. So coming to school, if you lived on this side of the island, you walked. If you didn't, you came by boat. Or rode your bike if you're on this side of the island. Mr. Hoagland, who lived next to the schoolhouse, he took his boat around the lake like buses do today and brought children to school.
When you cross these stairs, you will be entering 1886.
The typical school day began with a moral reading.
Though no is a very little word, it is not always easy to say it, and the not doing so often causes trouble. When we are asked to stay away from school and spend in idleness or mischief the time which ought to be spent in study, we should at once say no. When we are urged to loiter on our way to school and thus be late and interrupt our teacher and the school, we should say no. When some schoolmate wishes us to whisper or play in the schoolroom, we should say no. Our classroom does have rules. We will all listen carefully and follow these rules. Number 1, respect the schoolmaster. Obey and accept the punishments. 2, do not call your classmates names or fight with them. Love and help each other. 3, never make noises or disturb your neighbors as they work. 4, do not leave your seat without permission.
And you can be certain the students listened. Henry Flagler completed the stretch of railroad between St. Augustine and Palm Beach in 1894, shortly after his workers had constructed the sprawling Royal Poinciana Hotel on Palm Beach. The rich were privileged to enjoy the Palm Beach lifestyle, but it took hundreds of workers from out of town to build and furnish the Royal Poinciana Hotel, and many of them decided to stay on. As their numbers grew, so too did the number of students attending classes.
In 1901, children stopped coming to this school. It's too crowded. There was a new school in West Palm Beach at Dixie and Clematis Street, as we know now, and this building closed down. The children then went to the other school, and other schools in their communities, of course.
As the population grew in the northern area of Dade County, the county seat was moved from Miami to Juneau, and then back to Miami again 10 years later. By 1909, though, the northern part of the county had enough votes to create a new county, Palm Beach County. It became official on July 1st, 1909.
The school district boundaries followed the county boundaries. So when Palm Beach County was created, Palm Beach County School District was simultaneously created. We have 67 counties in Florida. We have 67 school districts in Florida.
In 1908, just 7 years after it opened, the four-room schoolhouse in West Palm Beach was replaced by the Central School up on the hill, the current site of the Alexander W. Dreyfus School of the Arts.
Interestingly, when Guy Metcalf, who was the first superintendent of Palm Beach County Schools, proposed building this school up on the hill, up on Tamarind Avenue in West Palm Beach, people were mortified. They said, "You can't build a school so far out in the sticks, the children will be eaten by bears." That was considered out in the sticks, Tamarind Avenue.
But despite the opposition, the Central School thrived, and a new high school was also built on the hill. And even the original community college campus was situated there. That's where nearly everyone went to school. Harvey Oyer's grandmother was in the Palm Beach High School class of 1914.
Well, there were no school buses, and there were only about 12 children in her class. And her cousin, Chuck Pierce, who was the son of the barefoot mailman Charles Pierce, was entrusted by the school district with a car that was owned by the school district. And he lived in Boynton, and the kids from Delray, I'm not sure how they'd make it up to Boynton, but they would make their way to Boynton, and he would drive them, together with my grandmother, who was his first cousin, and they would stop in Lantana and Lake Worth and the southern end of West Palm Beach and pick up kids along the way. So if you can imagine a senior in high school being entrusted with an automobile owned by the school district who would pick up and drop off all the kids between Boynton Beach and West Palm Beach. And it was still no more than 10 kids.
Boynton Beach and other cities south of Palm Beach had been growing since Henry Flagler extended his railroad to Miami just before the turn of the century. Settlers arrived and many went to work farming or fishing. Boynton had its own little schoolhouse by the year 1900. It was built on sticks in the mud flats. It contained one large room and one smaller one. The pioneers had to rough it in those days, and every member of the family was expected to chip in. Cindy Lyman Jamison's father grew up in Boynton Beach in those early years.
For him, being a child here in Boynton and going to school here, he was very poor, and every morning before he came here to school, he went fishing. And he would go and catch fish, and then he would take it to a market that was run by his father, and he would leave the fish there and sell them, and then he would come to school. And he never had a pair of shoes, never owned a school book. He had to borrow his school books all the way through high school, but he did finish school, and many of the children didn't finish school.
In fact, many of the young boys would work in the fields or packing trains with the produce their families grew in the rich tropical soil. Boynton Beach Elementary School was built in 1913. On opening day, 83 children had enrolled in grades 1 through 12.
We have some very large windows, and they let in a lot of natural sunlight. And air conditioning didn't come to the building until the late 1960s, and electricity wasn't put in until 1924. So if it was a dark day, they would dismiss class because that meant that there was a storm or a hurricane coming, and they'd let the students leave so they could go home and help with the chores.
Cindy Jamison has fond memories of growing up and going to school in Boynton Beach. She says everyone felt safe and children didn't have a care in the world.
I went to school here, and I still have the old home that's about 2 blocks from here. It's an 84-year-old home, and I could literally hear the school bell ring at my house, and I would take off. And I would get here most times before the tardy bell rang, although sometimes I was sent to the principal's office because I didn't get here in time.
Today, that school, built in 1913, is the home of the Schoolhouse Children's Museum. Boynton Elementary School was built for the black community in 1925. It replaced an earlier building and was torn down in 1960 when Poinciana Elementary was built to educate African American and other black students. And as the population began to expand in other areas of the county, schools were constructed to meet the need that grew radically after the armistice that ended the war between the Allies and Germany.
After World War I, 1918, 1919, all the way through about 1925, we experienced a massive population growth, a boom. That was boom period Florida. And to illustrate the kind of growth that we experienced in the 5 years between 1920 and 1925, the population of the city of West Palm Beach quadrupled. Quadrupling your population in 5 years, you can imagine what a challenge it was for local government to build schools and roads and hire police and firefighters to keep pace with the growth.
But the land boom that thrived in the early 1920s went bust by 1926. And then came the hurricane of 1928.
When we had so many people coming here every single day on that train, getting off at the train station, needing a place to live, needing food to eat, needing clothes, needing a house, and that was the biggie. So there was construction everywhere. There were lots of construction jobs in the late teens, after World War I, and through most of the 20s. When that stopped, to that 26 hurricane, and it really ground to a halt, I should say slowed in 1926 and ground to a halt after the 28 hurricane, it was a shock to this area.
3 of the 4 most profound hurricanes that struck Florida in the 20th century happened 9 years apart. The 26, the 28, and the 35, the 4th one being Andrew. And they really just brought the boom to a dead stop and sank Florida into a terrible depression and slowed, of course, the growth of families down to South Florida.
Palm Beach County's economy ground to a halt in the 1930s. The job market dried up and people lost their source of income. Many also lost their homes to the banks. Locals refer to it as a dark age.
The 1930s, we were truly in the Great Depression, as was the rest of America. And we had very little economic development here. People were living, in many cases, hand to mouth, just trying to survive. And that went on throughout the entire decade of the 1930s. In many of these historic neighborhoods throughout Palm Beach County, you'll see a number of homes built in the 1920s. That was the land boom. You'll see almost nothing built in the 30s or 40s. And then building resumes again in the 50s.
The economy was hurt at the tax level. And when government can't get enough money to pay their employees because values have dropped, they have to start layoffs or severe cutbacks in people's pay. And that's what happened here. They actually went in and asked the teachers to take less money. Other government workers' salaries were slashed.
And so too were the aggressive plans to build more and more schools to cope with the burgeoning population. Once the economy tanked, the exhilarating population growth slowed to a trickle, and that had a direct impact on the school system.
Of course, the biggest challenge to the schools in the 20s and 30s was the Depression. You can't build schools when you don't have any tax money. And some of the schools had already been set up and they were in motion, so they built those. But they couldn't build them as many as they would have liked. They couldn't build them as well as they would have originally planned. And they couldn't build them as big as they would have liked.
But despite the poor economic times, and perhaps because of them, there was a need for a local college that could serve the students who had the grades to continue their education past high school, but didn't have the money to attend a college far away. So the school district created Palm Beach Junior College in 1933. The school that would become Palm Beach Community College had 41 students that first year.
It started at Palm Beach High School, and they had just one little building across the street from the high school, and we'd see the kids there when I was in high school. They were the college kids.
Palm Beach Junior College was the first junior college in the state of Florida. John I. Leonard, who became the superintendent of the Palm Beach County School District in 1936, became its first president. The college changed locations after World War II when the military no longer needed Morrison Field, which later became Palm Beach International Airport.
Then in 1948, when the air base dismantled at Morrison Field, they gave the barracks and all the rooms out there for the college to use, and they had a swimming pool, and the officers club was the student union, and it was really neat. And then they reactivated the air base during the Korean conflict, and the college had to move, and Lake Park offered their town hall for the college to operate, so they had to really downsize, but they carried on for till 1956 in Lake Park, and then the county gave them the land where they are now.
But the years before World War II remained difficult as the country was struggling to pull itself out of the Depression. Times were tough, and many families learned to do without.
Health care back then was nothing like it is today. People didn't go to the doctors. Your parents might go to the doctors once or twice in their life. And I do remember that we had a free dentist that came when we were in the 4th grade, which had been 37 or so. And I don't remember what he did. He must have just examined your teeth. I don't remember any dental chair or anything like that.
The man who would go on to be an engineer who designed some 40 schools for the district also remembers how it was a different time.
Went to the beach most every day in the summer. We'd start in May and usually get sunburned. We didn't have any idea about the sun back then. Your lips would get sunburned, your back would burn, you'd have blisters. You'd go home, your mother'd put baking soda, wet some baking soda, put it in your back, and when you laid down it would harden up, and then you were laying in like a bed of rocks. A bicycle was a means of transportation. Now, there was only, I would guess, less than 6 cars in the high school class back in the 40s. we'd ride our bicycles down to the Lake Worth Inlet, Boynton Inlet. We'd go fishing down there, ride down our bikes and bring our fish home, carry them on the bike. And that was, I rode a bicycle to school probably from the first grade through the senior year. Never had an automobile until I was married.
Vera Farrington and Mary Roll Alford grew up in Delray Beach and went to school at the County Training School. Schools, just like every other aspect of society, were segregated.
The town was small and segregation was real, but there was unity, harmony among the people. I better not have disobeyed, and some other adults saw me, they would reprimand me, and then my mother would reprimand me when she got the news. So we were like one big family.
But we walked to school from the south side all the way here every day, and we did not have a cafeteria. So we had to walk home for lunch and walk back and be back on time, and we did that. There were no buses for the blacks. Now the white children, the school was over there, and they had buses, and the buses would ride by, but we walked. They didn't ride buses for us.
The same inequality that black students suffered in the lack of school buses, black teachers faced in the school district.
Charles Stebbins was a teacher in Palm Beach County in the 40s. And at the time there was a separate district for black teachers. But it was under the auspices of the school board. And white teachers had gotten a raise. And the black teachers, of course, did not get a raise. And the black teachers, which was unheard of at the time, challenged the right to give the white teachers a raise, but not the black teachers a raise. And they needed somebody to be the person, the target. And it had to be somebody who was willing to suffer. And Charles Stebbins volunteered.
The lawsuit, filed in 1941, cost Stebbins his career. He never taught again.
The black teachers group brought in a guy from the NAACP, a lawyer from the NAACP, a guy named Thurgood Marshall, who later, of course, became a justice of the Supreme Court, to fight this battle. This is before the Brown versus Board of Topeka, and they won, which is unheard of. But of course, at the time that they won, Stebbins was long gone. He'd been blackballed out of teaching, and he had a long and illustrious career working in Washington, D.C., working for different groups. But what a tremendous hero to be willing to put his career on the line. He must have known that if he put his name to the lawsuit, his career was over, and it was. So he was a very courageous person.
World War II became a defining time for Palm Beach County. Airmen were trained at Morrison Field, even as German U-boats patrolled off the coast, waiting for cargo ships bringing supplies up the East Coast.
Gasoline was rationed, and we couldn't do lights after dark. We had to have what they call them, air raid curtains, I guess. They were heavy rubber curtains that would pull across, not emit any light. And then there were always the neighborhood wardens who loved their power, come around and check, make sure no light was showing. And the tops of the street lights were painted so that they didn't shine up. And the top half of the car headlights were painted over so that the light didn't shine, it would shine down instead of up.
I did see a couple of tankers that had been torpedoed. I used to go fishing often at Headley's Pier, which is at the end of Worth Avenue. I almost grew up on it because my father knew Headley, so we got on free. Couldn't go out until daylight, and at darkness you couldn't think. And they were trying to close down any type of lights on Palm Beach here, so the U-boats would not know the depth of what they are from the shore.
But the war did more than inject a measure of anxiety in the lives of local youngsters. It also deprived them of role models.
When your people in front of you, older than you, are 18 years old, and they leave, some of your guides in life are gone. They can't teach you to fish. They can't teach you to do it. They're all gone. And you grew up kind of with a void that normally you wouldn't grow up without. You had teachers that were a few years older than you, and they were all gone in the service.
The greatest impact on the area, though, came after the war, when many of the soldiers who had trained here longed to return to the Sunshine State.
And the irony is that it helped Florida out of the Depression, but the tremendous growth, they couldn't build the schools fast enough to keep up with the families that were moving down here. A lot of those GIs came back from the war and they said, I want to live in Florida. And of course they got married, they had children, and they brought the families and the children down here.
What a wonderful look back at the first 40 years of the school district, Alan. We certainly have come a long way.
But the truly remarkable growth of South Florida and the school district, as you heard, took place after World War II. With the growth, though, came obstacles. The district had to build schools at a rapid pace to keep up with the population growth, and it had to deal with segregation.
All that and more on the next Heritage. I'm Laurel Sauer.
And I'm Alan Gerstel. We'll see you next time.